The silence from the Oval Office was deafening. In a week when the American political landscape convulsed with protests, international humiliation, and courtroom bombshells, the most powerful man in the world went quiet. No morning Truth Social barrage, no impromptu press gaggle, no rage-fueled press releases, just silence, the kind that speaks louder than any tweet ever could. Donald Trump's approval rating has collapsed to 33%. His approval on the economy, the single issue he staked his entire political identity on, sits at 30%. To put that number in stark historical perspective, that figure is worse than Richard Nixon's approval rating at the moment Nixon resigned the presidency in disgrace. Let that land for a moment. And yet, in the vacuum of Trump's silence, something remarkable happened. Not the unified, patriotic show of strength his allies desperately wanted the country to see, but a coordinated, almost choreographed parade of MAGA loyalists marching in lockstep toward one singular, baffling demand: build the president a ballroom. That's right. As Americans grappled with surging inflation, a jobs market showing early recessionary tremors, and a deeply unpopular military confrontation with Iran that yielded no clear strategy and no decisive outcome, Republican members of Congress chose this moment to make the case, on national television, repeatedly, with straight faces, that what the country truly needed right now was a ballroom at the White House. Meanwhile, Germany's chancellor publicly declared that America had been humiliated on the world stage. Iran's foreign minister flew to Moscow to embrace Vladimir Putin as a strategic partner. And a federal lawsuit was filed accusing the Trump administration of deliberately suppressing Epstein files, including references to Trump himself. This is the story of a political machine that overplayed its hand. A president who reached for a cultural moment to rally the country around him and found the country looking the other way. A ploy that didn't just fail, it backfired, loudly, in ways that are still echoing. What you're about to hear is not spin. It is not partisan commentary. It is a factual, documented account of one of the most politically revealing weeks of the Trump administration, told the way it actually unfolded. If you care about where this country is headed, and you should, subscribe now, because this story is just getting started. To understand what failed, you first have to understand what was being attempted. The White House Correspondents' Dinner has existed for over a century as a peculiar Washington ritual. Journalists, politicians, and celebrities in the same room, trading barbs, performing civility, and pretending, for one evening, that the adversarial relationship between the press and power is actually just a comedy bit. Trump boycotted it during his first term. He has had a deeply hostile relationship with the press corps throughout both administrations. But this year, an incident at or around the event, details of which were seized upon by Trump allies, was immediately framed as an opportunity. The MAGA media apparatus moved fast. The message was clear. This is a moment for unity around the president. This is a moment to close ranks. The strategic logic, if you can call it that, was familiar. Take a disruption, real or exaggerated, and use it to reframe the political conversation away from the administration's mounting vulnerabilities, the economy, Iran, the polls, and toward a narrative of victimhood and threat. Trump as target, Trump as martyr, Trump as the one figure standing between America and chaos. But there was a problem. The American people didn't buy it. The ballroom gambit was the most visible symptom of a strategy in collapse. One by one, Republican members of Congress appeared on television to argue that the real takeaway from this moment was the urgent need to construct a dedicated event space on White House grounds, a ballroom that would eliminate the security risks of holding presidential functions at commercial venues. Congressman after congressman, senator after senator, delivering what amounted to an identical talking point script with only minor variations in phrasing. Congressman Pat Fallon cited security concerns about hotel guests. Congressman Mike Lawler invoked assassination attempt statistics. Speaker Mike Johnson spoke of 7-inch thick glass. The repetition was almost musical and entirely transparent. What it revealed was not a party with a coherent governing vision, but a messaging operation in reactive mode. When the actual policy record becomes too painful to defend, when inflation is real, when the Iran gambit has no clean exit, when the polls show numbers worse than Nixon, the play is distraction. The play is spectacle. This time, the spectacle was a ballroom, and the country, by a significant margin, was not distracted. While Republican lawmakers were doing television hits about ballroom specifications, the rest of the world was not waiting. Germany's Chancellor Friedrich Merz, speaking with a directness that would be considered remarkable even by European standards, stood before an audience and delivered a blunt assessment of American foreign policy under Trump. His words were not the careful diplomatic hedging typical of transatlantic allies. They were a verdict. Merz said the United States had, under Trump, demonstrated no coherent strategy whatsoever in its confrontation with Iran. He drew explicit comparisons to Afghanistan and Iraq, two military engagements that consumed trillions of dollars and decades of American credibility, only to end without the objectives their architects promised. He noted that Iran's negotiators had, by any objective measure, outmaneuvered Washington, sending American diplomats to Islamabad and allowing them to depart empty-handed. His conclusion was unsparing. A whole nation, he said, was being humiliated by Iranian leadership. This is the Chancellor of Germany, one of America's most important NATO allies, speaking not in a classified briefing, but publicly. Simultaneously, Iranian Foreign Minister Arakchi arrived in Moscow for a pre-planned multi-nation diplomatic tour that included stops in Oman and Pakistan. In Russia, he met with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and President Vladimir Putin. The statements that followed were not subtle. Iran and Russia, Arakchi declared, are strategic partners. Russian support for Iran, he said, has been consistent, and Iranian support for Russia equally so. Their cooperation, he pledged, would continue. Putin, for his part, praised the Iranian people for their courage and sovereignty, expressed hope they would endure this difficult period, and stated that Moscow would do everything in its power to support Iran. This is the geopolitical landscape Trump's silence was failing to address. An emboldened Iran, a Russia publicly aligning with Tehran, a key NATO ally openly questioning American competence, and a Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most critical energy choke points, reportedly mined, with European nations offering minesweepers and waiting for hostilities to cease before they could begin clearing it. The ballroom was not the story. This was the story. On the same week that Trump went silent and his allies pivoted to ballroom politics, a federal lawsuit landed in American courts, and it deserves the full attention it has not yet received from the mainstream press. Katie Fang, a legal analyst and journalist with the Midas Touch Network, filed suit against the Trump administration, specifically against Donald Trump and the United States Department of Justice. The suit alleges brazen violations of the Epstein Files Transparency Act, a law designed to ensure that records related to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal network are released to the public. The allegations in the lawsuit are specific and documented. The Department of Justice, the suit contends, missed legally mandated disclosure deadlines. Documents that were released were, according to the filing, over-redacted, with key material obscured in ways that go beyond any legitimate national security or privacy justification. Among the records allegedly withheld, materials referencing Donald Trump. The suit asks a federal court to do three things. First, order full disclosure of the withheld records. Second, remove what the filing characterizes as unlawful redactions. Third, appoint a special master, an independent judicial officer, to oversee the DOJ's compliance going forward, given what the lawsuit frames as a documented pattern of obstruction. This is not a fringe complaint. This is a federal lawsuit filed by a licensed attorney and journalist, making specific legal claims about specific legal violations, seeking specific judicial remedies. The significance of the timing should not be overlooked. In a week when Trump's approval numbers hit historic lows, when his Iran strategy was publicly eviscerated by a NATO ally, when his congressional allies were reduced to arguing about event venues, a lawsuit accusing his Justice Department of hiding records that reference him personally entered the federal court system. The public's right to know is not a slogan. It is, in this case, a legal argument before a federal judge. Presidents do not go quiet by accident. Donald Trump is, by any historical measure, one of the most relentlessly public political figures in American history. His communication style, impulsive, combative, volume maximizing, has been a defining feature of both his business career and both of his presidential terms. The silence, therefore, is data. His last public post before this analysis was written called for renaming ICE to NICE, the National Immigration and Customs Enforcement, apparently so that media organizations would be compelled to say NICE agents in their coverage. The idea originated from a random social media account. Trump endorsed it as though it were policy. That was the last substantive communication from the President of the United States during one of the most consequential geopolitical weeks of his second term. Meanwhile, the First Lady broke her own silence, not to address Iran or the economy or the lawsuit, but to attack late-night comedian Jimmy Kimmel, accusing him of hateful rhetoric and demanding that ABC take action against him. The statement, stilted in its phrasing and disconnected from any policy reality, landed as what it was: a proxy engagement in a culture war at a moment when the actual war, the one involving bombs, blocked straits, and Russian strategic partnerships, demanded serious attention. What the silence, the ballroom push, and the late-night feud all share is a single underlying logic. When governing becomes indefensible, perform. When the record is too painful to stand on, change the subject. When the country is watching the polls, the prices, and the international headlines, give them something else to look at. But the country appears, at this particular moment, to be declining the offer. Approval ratings at 33% do not lie. A number worse than Nixon's resignation-era polling does not emerge from an electorate that is distracted. It emerges from an electorate that is paying attention to the prices they pay at the grocery store, to the jobs reports, to the German chancellor's verdict, to the federal lawsuit, to the silence itself. The ploy failed not because it was poorly executed. It failed because the audience had already made up its mind. What comes next is the question every political observer, every foreign policy analyst, and every American voter should be asking, because the gap between the performance and the reality is not narrowing, it is widening. And the world, as Friedrich Merz made clear, is watching. Subscribe, stay informed, because the next chapter of this story will not wait.